Not your average convo, not your average life. Not your everyday mother, not your typical wife. Not your usual podcast, this you too will see. So hope that you will stop a while and spend some time with me.
Welcome to Workship. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to a dear friend and a wonderful engineer, leader, and author, Pratima Gluckman. Welcome to Workship.
Hi, Sarah. It's so good to be here. I wish I could give you a hug.
I know. I wish I could just
just reach out.
just love you. Pratima, one of the things that I like to do with everybody who comes on the show is just to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we'll unpack some more about your background and how we know each other as well.
Okay, so I'm Pratima Gluckman. I've been in tech for over 20 years. I don't feel that old though. It's just been 20 years. And so the first 10 years of my life, I was a code monkey for a long time. Just wrote a bunch of code. And then the second 10 years, I worked a lot on my leadership. I got into leadership, and that was very organic. I just loved getting into a leadership role. And so that's what I did. I worked at VMware for 11 years, and today I'm at a fantastic company, LinkedIn. It's an amazing company with amazing culture, amazing people, just want to do good and do right. And I'm looking forward to just a wonderful career at LinkedIn.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad. Now, just by context, I want everybody to know that Pratima and I were at VMware together. And so we were actually in a leadership course together.
Yes, I remember that.
Do you remember that? Yeah.
Yeah. Was it Genius Maker?
I think it was Genius Makers. And we were talking about how can we be seen in a way where we can have a conversation that could actually be seen as somewhat challenging, as it related to our own identities as well as gender and inclusion. And I remember looking across the room at you and saying, we need to keep each other strong.
Right. Yes, I remember that. And after that, we were joined in the hip, right? After that class.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm blessed to have you in my life. Hey, so let's start at the beginning, because I think for many who watch this program, they are graduating. They are still trying to decide what they want to do. They may be coming also from a place of feeling concerned about the future state and their own identity in it. So let's start from the beginning. You know, when you saw yourself and you thought about what I want to be when I grow up, is it where you are today? What was that like?
Surprisingly, yes. I always wanted to be an engineer. I think it was because of all the role models I had in my life. My dad was an engineer. My brother's an engineer. And I just naturally felt like I wanted to be an engineer. My older sister played cricket for the country, and so she was a sports person. And I watched her play cricket. And there were times when my family tried to put me into that game. Like they were like, you need to play cricket, because they thought I had the potential for it. But it was never something that I liked. I think it was just the hard work of playing. I mean, my sister played for 6 hours every day. It wasn't cut out for me. I was more like math science, and that fascinated me. And I got into computer science, and that's where I was very intrigued by computers. And when I was growing up, email was hardly a thing. And so I went to one of the best universities in India. It was hard to get in, but I did. And the only reason I was able to do that was because I had role models again. I had these women and men that actually went to that school, and I was like, oh, if they can do it, I can do it. So it was always that thing where and that's kind of how I've lived my life. It's mostly like if I see ordinary people doing these extraordinary things, I'm like, yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, great.
And so I went to one of the best schools in India, got an engineering degree, and then I came to the United States to get a master's in computer science. So I have actually 3 degrees. No, too many degrees.
So I was going to ask you what happened after college, but it sounds like you were in it for a while.
I was in it for a while. It's actually interesting. I completely forgot about this life in college. And I remembered recently because of the COVID situation and just having my kids at home. And I'm so worried that they're going to lose like a year off school. But it actually struck me that when I graduated from my engineering degree, and I went to one of the best schools in India, and companies come and they hire you like you're like hot. I actually didn't get a job after I graduated. And I went home and I was with my family for 6 months. I didn't work for 6 months. My friends were working, people in my class graduated, and I can't remember what emotions I was going through at that point. I think there was a lot of pressure from my family. They were like, we sent you to the school and now you're at home without a job. Uh, and nothing happened. I lost 6 months of my life, but it really didn't impact the rest of my career, right?
Yeah.
And so I think people should have that perspective because these are hard times. And if you can't find a job, I know there's immigration issues. I understand that completely. But, if you're not doing anything at this point, and it's okay.
Yeah. My first job out of college was at a shoe store. I worked at Timothy Shoes. And, I'm not putting that on my LinkedIn profile, people, but I'm just telling you, it all works out, right?
It all works out. And there was a lot of pressure on me to find a job. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to, find a job in India or wanted to come to the US. I was just conflicted. I was just going through this, I didn't interview at companies. It wasn't like, you can get a job if you don't interview, but it was just, I think I just rebelled. There was something going on at that, in your 20s, you really don't know what to do.
So where did you land? What happened?
So I came to the United States. So what I did was I took my GMAT. So those 6 months, I took my GMAT, and again, I made some mistakes. Like when I look back, University of Texas, Austin was a place I could have gone to, but I chose not to go there because I wanted to be close to my sister. She was in Fort Worth. So I went to Arlington just so I was, I could be close to her. So there were some decisions I made that I don't know if they were a mistake. I mean, I don't know if I would have been in a different place if I went to Austin, but I think what we do is we put so much importance on schools, and it's like a status thing, right? Like you want to go to one of the best schools, and because I always went to one of the best schools, my family was also like, you need to go to a really good school. Like you can't. I'm not saying Arlington's not, it's not a good school, but, it's not at the top. So, but you know what? I think life just works out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, your journey, because even to that point, what you've shared with me is really in contrast to a lot of the things we hear from others, right? So you came from a family that, while you wanted to go to school in engineering, was perhaps even encouraging you to consider cricket.
Yes.
or you wanted to go and get all of these degrees, and they're saying, well, what's going on, and it's fascinating. There's a lot of different moments of just the yin and the yang at play there.
Yeah, but I wasn't, I'm not raised in a very traditional Indian family where there's a lot of pressure on kids to excel and go to really my family was basically, at a point they were like, yeah, just do what you want to do, right? Like if you're happy doing something. I mean, my older sister playing cricket, in those days, women didn't make money playing cricket. Now it's changing. And they were fine with her choice of a profession. So it wasn't about making money, or, it wasn't like you have to be a lawyer, doctor, or an engineer. It was never that. But I guess, because they invested so much in, the school that I went to, it was expensive. And so they just wanted some return of investment.
I love it. So where did you land? What was the job?
I started, okay, this is taking me back to memory lane. I started with American Airlines, Sabre in Dallas.
Wow. And in that role, and as you progressed, it was always in engineering?
Yes, it was always in engineering. So I kind of took the straight path. Uh, but I didn't just write code all the time. In the sense that I worked at a lot of startups. So I made a very conscious decision to work for startups. So I did that for the first 10 years of my career. And the reason I did that was I really wanted to work at a place that had some risk associated with it. When I worked at American Airlines, it felt like a 9 to 5 job to me. Mm. And I just felt like, I was working with people who had kids and I was in my 20s, and I just didn't feel like I was challenged. It was so predictable. My job was predictable, and I didn't want that. So I took a chance and I worked at a lot of startups before VMware. So I worked at a ton of startups before I joined VMware. So VMware was my second big company.
But you stayed there for 11 years.
Yes, I stayed there for 11 years. I mean, VMware is a great company. The people, the culture that Diane Green had, I mean, it was kind of early on when I started. That culture stayed. We did try to live up to the ideal of meritocracy at VMware. When I joined as an engineer at VMware, it was amazing because I worked with principal engineers and I worked with senior staff, and they gave me so much respect.
Yeah. How did you know that, it's interesting because a lot of times you do talk about, it's interesting how you say that you knew from the very beginning that you wanted to be an engineer, that path was going to be straight. Of course, you don't just stay in one job. You go from different place to place to place. How did you know what was the right thing to do? Was it always your own moral compass, or how did you just know how to be true to yourself in jumping from job to job?
So I started in 2002, and we did have, no, actually I started in 2000, then 9/11 happened, right? There was the dot-com bubble. So I lived through all of that, so there were times where, I took a job because I needed a job, right? And then there were some decisions I made. I said, because I was an immigrant. I mean, I'm an immigrant, and I had visa issues and things like that. So I didn't want to be bound to a company with them processing my visa. So I worked for this company that held my visa, and then I worked at all these different companies. So I kind of made some decisions that way. Because I knew I wanted to live here, and I knew I wanted to work at companies in the United States. So I made some decisions that would give me some security in the country, right? Because there were times, the dot-com bubble, there were so many things. I mean, the 2008 crash happened, and that's when I joined VMware. And it's funny, I was thinking about this, and I joined LinkedIn when COVID happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's maybe it's me.
Well, but it's true. It's very true, right? Like there's things that we do based on what it is, our talents and our skills and our training. Mm-hmm. Also, what is our purpose, but also just where we are at certain points in our life. Like, mm-hmm. Mama needs direct deposit benefits.
Exactly.
But there's points before where it was fine to be able to just take a job every 8 months and do something different. So there's different time and place for those life experiences. I get it. What were moments in your life that impressed upon you and made clear what you wanted your future to look like?
I think when I had that moment in 2016. That's when I went off to write this book. Before that, I was never, I don't think I ever saw my gender, because I was not raised that way. I wasn't, if gender was so important to my family, my sister wouldn't have played cricket. You know what I mean? Like we would have been married off at 20s, and I didn't learn to cook for a long time. Like all the gender stereotypical things that you would expect families to do, I never went through that, and so I never recognized my gender for a long time. And it was in 2016 was when I had this aha moment because I was so stuck in my career and I didn't know what was going on, and I felt I had all this potential, and I kept wondering what was going on. And the first initial instinct for me was I blame myself. I thought I wasn't doing something right. Like I felt like I wasn't working hard at my job, and I wasn't, working on the right strategic projects. I just felt like it was me, and I think this light bulb went off for me, and I was like, oh, you know what? I think my gender has something to do with this. Mm-hmm. No matter how much I bring my whole self to work, and I can put 200% into it, there's this bias that really prevents you from progressing. And being female and a woman of color, you're disadvantaged, and an immigrant. There's like so many things. But then there was also this thing in the back of my head, but there are other women who are successful. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so then I went after, these women. I talked to all these women, wrote this book. And after that, I think it's kind of become clear to me a little bit, my purpose. I've kind of taken a little bit of a break this year. But it's more like, how do I move the needle for women in tech, or women in general, right?
Let's pause on the fact, though. So the book, nevertheless, She Persisted, True Stories of Women in Tech. Talk to us about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so my journey was basically, I'm stuck in my career. My peers are stuck. I look around, there are no women in leadership roles. It's like, what's going on? Is it me? Is it the system? But then I also wanted to hear these women's stories. I wanted to see how, they were managing to climb up this ladder, right? Like how are you doing it? Like, what are you doing differently? And so I interviewed 19 women. I actually interviewed 20, 25, 26 women, and I got 19 stories in the book when I finally published it. And I wanted to find out, I was very curious about their childhood, because I feel like there's a lot of things that happen in your childhood that really set the course for your career. Because I was raised in a family where my dad had a 9-to-5 job. Like, he had this job, he had job security, every day he went to work, came back. And so my life's kind of like that, because, there's this job security. But then you see people who are born in business families, and then they go off and do business. You know what I mean? Like, I think right. You kind of do what your parents have done. Like, I think there's this comfort zone. And so I was very curious about their childhood. So I kind of dug into their childhood. And so my story is, so if you read each story in the book, it's basically, what they did in their childhood, like what the influences were. And you'll find that it's a lot of parents, teachers, they've had mentors. And then the career choices, like how did they decide what they did? And finally, it's like, how did they get to where they've gotten to? Like, what did they do? Mm-hmm. Right? And it's funny, most of the women that I talked to in the book, they all just felt lucky.
Really?
Yeah, they felt lucky and fortunate, a majority of them. And it's interesting how we approach things. We just feel like we're lucky and fortunate to have gotten to where we've gotten to. But I think there was a lot of hard work and grit and even smartness, right? Like being able to navigate your career in a certain way that propels you forward. So
you spoke to amazing women in that book, including Tully Whitney and many others who've come after her in a way to inform, especially the engineering space. Was there any story that was a surprise, either hers or anyone else's, where you just thought to yourself, I've got something here in this moment that I must share with others so that we can all achieve?
Yeah. I think there are many stories. The one that comes to me all the time is Telly's story. I was sitting opposite her, and we were sitting at this cafe in Saratoga. It was a Friday afternoon. It was sunny. And I had a question on imposter syndrome. And I asked her if she had imposter syndrome. And she said, I have it every day. I feel like I'm not good enough. And I think that gave me goosebumps, like literally, like I was just, because I couldn't believe, like I was sitting in front of greatness. I was sitting in front of this woman who stood on stage at Grace Hopper, like, founded that whole movement and impacted so many women's lives. And she said that. And then I asked her, I said, how do you get over it? And she said, I just show up. And I think that really helped me. It helped me actually even publish the book because I just had to show up every day for it. I just had to show up. And it wasn't easy writing this book. I don't think people realize that it's not very glamorous to write a book. There's a lot of heartache, pain, time, turmoil that goes into it. So I have a lot of respect for authors who do this full time because it's being an author is not a full-time job for me, but I have a lot of respect for people who do that because it is a lot of work. And so I value every book I read and the effort that's gone into those books.
Yeah. Was that a natural thing to do, step into the role of being an author?
No.
Or did you just based on ignorance?
It was just based on ignorance. It wasn't natural. I never took a grammar course at school. I never did. So my family spoke English all the time. And so English was natural, but I never took a grammar course. So I really struggled as an author, just writing. It wasn't easy. All I will say is I had a fantastic editor. I would give her a lot of credit. She was my rock. So if you want to write a book, get yourself a good editor. Grammarly helped. It still helps me today.
I love it. What that book did, though, and I don't know if you intended it to do so, though, is it certainly advanced your identity well beyond engineer and mother and student into a writer as well as an advocate. How have you stepped into that new voice?
So it's, it was an interesting journey after I published the book. Because, I was so naive about things. I didn't even know you had to go do a book tour. I had no plan because I was like, I'll publish this book. It'll be on Amazon. We'll figure out, I didn't do it for the money. But I also knew that I needed to get the book out to as many people as possible. And and Telly was the one who gave me this idea. She said, Pratima, why don't you just go speak at companies? And she said, I'll go with you. I was like, fantastic. And so we did this whole road show with the women in the book. So I had Erica Lockheimer and Pam Koska, Telly, Patty. These women were constantly with me. Orna, Dahlia, like these women went with me to these companies and they went, so I spent a bunch of time with companies. I spoke at companies, advocated there, and then I went to university. So I kind of did a targeted approach. I spent 6 months with companies, and I spent like 6 months with universities, and then I started doing a podcast because I wanted to get more voices in. So I did the podcast. I worked a lot on my website. I did a little bit of blogging, not much, but I really did. And you invited me to Realtor, so So there were a lot of things. I think Realtor was the first one I ever did. It's actually funny. Yeah. And I've been advocating for that. And I've been doing conferences. I loved going to conferences and talking. I started workshops. So I did a bunch of things last year for the last 2 years since it got published since 2018. This year I kind of took a break. The whole COVID situation.
One of the things I hear you talk about a lot is just stepping into a space, perhaps not even based on readiness, but just because you have to or because you need to.
Yes.
Yes. And it sounds like that's also what Lee was doing, right? Like imposter syndrome, like perhaps I don't want to show up or I don't feel that I'm deserving of showing up, but I just know that I must because it won't advance. I won't advance, or my work won't advance, or women won't advance. How do you do that? How do you master that?
I think you have to really care about what you're doing.
Right.
Right. Deep down, you have to care about it. And your intention has to be true. And I did this a lot. I really worked on what my intention was when I was going on this journey, because I knew it was going to take a lot of time out of me. It was going to take time away from my family. So I was going to sacrifice all of that. And I wanted to be really true about my intention. Like, what was my intention? And I kept going back to this one word, and it sticks with me all the time, and that was change. That one word for me was change. Is like, how do I create change? How do I challenge the status quo? Right. And I think you have to really care about something to, I think once you care about it, and it comes from within you, and you become intentional, it'll just get, things will just happen. There'll be down days, there'll be up days, and you just go through it. And that's what happened with the book. Like, I'm trying to work on my second book, but I haven't gotten there. I don't think I've sat down and been intentional about it and all that. Like, I haven't had the brain space to do that. But I know that if I do that and I get to that space and I make up my mind and I feel like I truly, truly care about this, then I'm going to make that change. Right. And I'm going to go through that. And I think that's important for anyone. Like, I think you have to really want that for you or for someone else.
How do you think, though, there's an intentionality related to change, where it's your spirit, your purpose, you're driven in order to really care. But there's also some steps that people can take, right? Whether you're graduating, regardless of, depending on stage of life, like, what would your advice be on readiness?
I would do a lot of journaling.
Really?
Yeah. I've been journaling a lot. I've been doing a lot of gratitude stuff, and I'm trying to do a lot of other things where working just working on your emotional, like your it's physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual, like getting all of that right together. And this COVID time is good to make a lot of those changes. And I'm trying to get there to kind of be ready for whatever's going to come our way. Like, I don't know what's next. There's so much uncertainty, right? So in some sense, I'm kind of preparing myself, trying to get there. But you have to want it, Sarah, to even get to that state where you have to get ready for it, right? And prepare yourself. You have to really deeply want it.
What's your outlook for the future?
It's a tough question, really tough question. I actually don't know. I think it's going to be a long journey for us. And I think that when we come out of it, we'll just be stronger. So I'm reading this book called The Fourth Turning. And in that book, they talk about the different seasons. You've got these different seasons, and that's how history has evolved. So there's been patterns in history that these two authors have found. And right now we're in this fourth turning. So right now it's a state of turmoil. And so this too shall pass, right? Like, you can't believe that any situation is going to be permanent. Everything's going to pass. So this too shall pass, and I will come out stronger. We may be different, but we'll come out stronger. And we're seeing a revolution right now, like what's happening in the country. And if we stick through that, I think we'll come out on the other end in a better place. So I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic, because you can't be anything else, right? And I'm preparing myself and my family for whatever that may be.
Well, I think we have a lot to learn from your story and from the stories that are in Nevertheless, She Persisted. And I do think that to take that word change that motivated you and drove you forward is really important for us to use also as part of the wind at our back. Use that as our motivation to solve for what is our own change that we want to see in ourselves, that we want to see in our careers, so that we really care about what we're doing. And whether that's in our work or in serving our community or serving others who need to be seen. I think that there's a lot of power in that. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
How can others find you and engage more in your work and your book and podcast, just in order to grow their understanding of the work that you've also done?
So I have a website. It's pratimagluckman.com. So people can go to the website. There's information on the podcast. They can always reach me through, the contact page. I'm pretty responsive. And I'm on LinkedIn. So use that platform. Hit me up for, jobs or anything of that sort. But yeah, I think those are the two mediums.
Well, any last closing words just related to where we are in this world and our exciting place in it?
Yeah, these are really, really tough times. Really tough times, and it's pushing us beyond things that we've ever imagined, right? But we are adaptable human beings, and I've seen how we've done this shelter in place, like we've abided by laws where, I feel like, at least in California, that's what I see, like around me, we've been so good about protecting ourselves and protecting our families from coronavirus. And we're so adaptable. Like we can change in the time of need. And so, yeah, I think it's empowering that we can do that. And we have to change and we have to evolve, or else we'll die.
Well, that we also have to, we can change and evolve, not only though in how we deal with our health, but also how we deal with in the spirit and the health of our minds, in relationship to one another, in relationship to color, in relationship to diversity, inclusion, the color of our skin, marginalized populations. That is change. That is purpose-driven work. That is something that I hope everyone who's listening also cares about.
Right.
Well, I love you. Thank you.
I love you too.
Thank you for being here. I'm so grateful. And we'll share more about how to reach you and your work and everything that we put up here on our channel and our podcast too. So be well. Thank you, everyone. And thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
So I hope that you will stop a while.